guys, sorry it's been so long. I've been a little busy, but here we are back with the Insomniacs, chapters 9 and 10 this time. And again, this is by Merritt Weisenberg. And let's get started. Chapter 9. I remembered everything about the day of my first dive. The marble pastel bathing suit I wore, the chlorine smell of the swim center, the dark hallway that opened to the vast deck that with stadium seating. First, I noticed the swimmers rapidly traversing the lanes like cars. Then, in the distance, in a separate pool, I saw the divers. I barely had an idea of the difference between the platform and the springboard. I'd only seen a diving board at the country club where we sometimes met friends of my parents. I lagged a half step behind my father when he introduced me to a coach. I could still trace the motions of my first dive. A simple, closed pike. First, the coach had another child demonstrate it for me. Then I climbed the wet ladder and did just what he'd shown me. I grinned underwater and wanted to do it again. I did the next dive they explained, and then another. After each one, I was met by the coach, while my dad stood off to the side, his back against the painted cement bricks, a self-satisfied look on his face. I understood that. It said maybe I had potential. Just maybe I took after him. When my dad took me to dive that day on my 7th birthday, just as he'd promised, it was like he'd handed me a shiny new piece of myself that I hadn't known was missing. Sometimes I thought of that day when I needed a way to calm myself. Tonight, I was using the memory to distract from the fact that I was perched on the roof. I was so desperate to rest that I'd climbed out of my window, thinking that if I confronted my fear about next door, I might finally be able to sleep. Now that I couldn't sleep, I was overly aware of the abandoned house, all of the hiding behind curtains and locked doors that only made me more afraid, which in turn made it harder to sleep. The roof itself didn't scare me. Being up high was where I felt safest. On the diving board, nothing could get to me, until recently. On the rooftop deck at my house, there was a built-in cement bench and a planter behind it, filled now with depleted, cracked dirt instead of an array of curated succulents. If you stepped up on the planter, it was only one bigger step to the flat roof. I looked over one shoulder again at the brown puddles that dotted the expanse of roof behind me, thick with pollen and dead leaves. At my feet, a stray plastic flower pot lay on its side in the dirt, left behind instead of discarded. Now that I was spending more time at home and awake, I saw these details I'd previously walked right past. There were so many of them. Artifacts from another time. It was 1 a.m. and all was quiet below on the cul-de-sac. I had been waiting for a perfect moment like this. I was calm, and maybe it was time to replay the dive that had sidelined me. I closed my eyes. First, I saw the kiss between Van and Caroline, how her wrist draped over his shoulder while he pressed his hand to her bare lower back, exposed by the deep half circle of her swimsuit. She had taken a few steps up into the stands to greet him. The kiss was quick. Caroline immediately raised her head to check if she'd been caught by Coach Mike. "Look at them," Alex breathed. Alex and I stood together, shoulder to shoulder, unexpectedly witnessing Caroline and Van's kiss. Caroline trotted back to the deck and rejoined the team. We were never supposed to leave the deck during a meet. Coach Mike walked away, and Caroline held out a hand to stop him. Like me, she probably knew it was better to get the lecture over with before he stewed. Next, I was climbing the ladder, and then at the end of the board, and I had the sensation that I'd suddenly awakened from a long, beautiful dream. A layer had been stripped away, and I could feel eyes on me, where before I'd been oblivious and confident. There was the realization that the situation was totally unsafe. A voice in my head said with pity, "Oh, little girl, you were so stupid to believe it was that easy." I couldn't remember diving. It was supposed to have been a reverse 2.5 on the 3-meter springboard. Despondent, I flipped through my internal index of other advanced dives, and there was nothing. The worst thing, it was right there. All of that knowledge was in my head, but my brain was playing games with me. I wanted to scream in frustration. Why was this happening? Why was I holding myself back? Was this really about Van? Worry about failing Coach Mike? I kicked the empty plastic flower pot hard, accidentally propelling it off the roof and 2 stories down, where it made 3 horrible hollow bounces, loud enough to wake the neighbors. I held my breath and waited for the lights to pop on. 1 second, 2 second, 1 second, 2, 10 passed. Van's was the only light that had been on. Now he walked over to his window to investigate. I'd expected him to turn away immediately once he saw it was me, but he continued to stand and watch. After a few moments, he left the window, and then his bedroom light went out. I exhaled with disappointment. It had been 1 day since he was standing in my kitchen with me, and since then I'd only seen him across the classroom. If I didn't know it was ludicrous that he'd care enough to bother, I'd suspect he was avoiding me. I wanted a do-over. It sounded far-fetched that a view would jog his memory, but of the off chance that it did, I wanted to help him. I just didn't know the right way to get that do-over. Walk up to him at school, knock on his door. "Ingrid?" I heard the faintest stage whisper. I leaned forward to look down. Van was directly below, tucked against my house in the shadows. "Come up," I said louder than he had spoken, and I could almost feel him cringe. Not everyone had parents who were absent at night. My heart tripled its beat as Van lightly climbed the spiral black metal staircase against the side of the house. He stood on the roof deck and looked up at me. "Hey," he said softly. If I had to admit it, that's when the incomplete, unfinished feeling I'd carried around with me since we were 9 years old disappeared. "What are you doing on the roof?" "Waiting for you." "I can't sleep." Van laughed humorously. "I wonder why." He stood below me and paced nervously. Then, decidedly, he took the step up onto the planter and then the bigger step up onto the roof. He came to sit down next to me, but scooted a few feet behind me, safely away from the edge. "That's right, you're scared of heights," I said. "You remembered," he said dryly. We can go to my bedroom, I said. Van laughed in surprise. You know what I mean. I want to help. I just didn't want you up there the other night because... don't worry about it. I get it. He interrupted quickly. I barged in. There were clothes thrown on the floor. I kept going. Hey, you saw worse when you came into my room. If you don't remember, she walked in on him making out with his girlfriend, getting a little frisky. That was bad. He joked. His reminder of Caroline dampened my relief at getting the opportunity to explain myself. I didn't know what to say or do. Next, and I hated the feeling. Until last week, I had always been so sure. Nothing scared me. We were quiet as we took in the view of the street and the wilderness beyond. The night noise of crickets rose in the undulanting clouds from the greenbelt. Simultaneously, we dropped our heads back to watch an airplane traverse the sky above us, the tail lights winking. Okay, let's go inside, he said. This is making me nervous. I wasn't sure if he was referring to the house next door, his fear of heights, or me. It's exactly the same, he said with a little bit of wonder in his voice. I was on edge. It was only when someone new came over that I could really see my surroundings. There was the stained golden jute carpet with the giant dark spot where I'd spilled juice, the faded yellow everything. Thinned out bedding with pillows that had lost their plushness, the wallpaper more appropriate for a little girl, and then all the medals and awards made me look like an egomaniac. He could see all of me, and I hated it. Over here, I said quickly. The sooner he looked at the view, the sooner he could leave. I thought about what he could tell Max and Wilson. Everything is shabby compared to how it used to be. She was so nervous having a guy in her room. You look like him now, Van said. He was studying a framed photograph in my bookcase. It was of me and my dad dropping fall leaves over my mom's head. Her eyes were closed and her face was upturned, laughing. I was a kindergartner when the photo was taken. In a girl way, I mean. It's a compliment. Both my parents were great looking, but maybe he assumed my mom was the one any girl would want to take after. She was blonde, after all, like Caroline. I mean, you have his eyes. Man, I was so scared of him. We all were. He'd give you that stare. That's funny. When I was little, he was the softie compared to my mom. I watched Van take one hand from his pocket and, like he couldn't help himself, he quickly adjusted the frame so it was in line with the others. He shoved his hand back in his pocket and slowly faced me. He was so cool. How he'd play music for us when he was home. Well, I guess he wasn't that cool. Van trailed off awkwardly. I never saw any of that coming, but I guess I was only 9. I had to blink rapidly. I'd never been so sensitive before the accident. I used to be better at letting things bounce off me. I also wasn't used to anyone talking about my dad. It was weird. When something that went unspoken 99% of the time in my house was so easily said by Van. It was also weird to suddenly remember how well Van had known him. Yeah, there was a ton of fighting in the garage. They thought I couldn't hear, but of course I heard everything. I surprised myself by continuing. "What did they fight about?" Van asked. "The amount of time my dad spent in LA. When his career really took off, he wanted us to join him, and even though we'd moved here because of him, he was annoyed my mom was taking so long to move us. She wanted me to finish elementary school here. Then I guess Brooke became his client and he stopped asking." I cleared my throat. "Do you remember my dad?" "Just bits and pieces. Him lighting candles on my birthday cake, chasing the dog in the backyard." Van's expression didn't change, but I instantly got a lump in my throat. I didn't want to say, "I'm sorry." That seemed too inadequate. So instead, I abruptly changed the subject. "The other night, this was where I was standing when I saw the light." Van made his way around the foot of my bed and came to stand next to me. His presence made everything in the room look so much smaller. He smelled like fresh deodorant and the faded scent of dryer sheets. I glanced sidelong and saw how flat and hard his chest was under his gray t-shirt. And I had an urge to lean against him and feel how solid he was. I couldn't imagine he was attracted to me in the least. In his eyes, I was the tomboy I'd always been. And now, except for suddenly having a chest, I was tall and lanky with a lot of straight lines, boyish compared to Caroline, whose curvious body was the open envy of the girls in the diving team. The last time Van had been up in his room, he had been just a little kid. The last time Van had been up in this room, he had been just a little kid. So much had happened since then. So many new experiences and firsts for him. But for me, it had been dive after dive after dive. That was my catalog of firsts. I could tell anyone in detail about my first 2.5 and on the 3 meter, scoring amazingly on my tuck list at nationals and placing in the top 3 in the 14 and 15-year-old division. I should be happy to know so much about one single thing, but at this moment, I felt young compared to Van, and so different. Like Coach Mike said, I wasn't a normal teenager. I couldn't be. I had to choose. "Right here," I blurted and pointed. Van leaned to look and his shoulder brushed mine. He didn't seem aware. I held perfectly still while he took in the partial view of the cedar fence, the runway strip of Bermuda grass now thick with weeds, the untouched trash cans next to the tan brick house. There were 2 windows on the side of the house, both flanked by colonial-looking black shutters. The house was like a poor, innocent, sleeping giant that should be left alone, a traditional family house. Bad things shouldn't happen in the same space where the little girl had played and her home had been her entire world. Where the hell was she now? Was she okay? "Tell me again what you saw." Van became aware he was leaning a bit close to me and took a step to the right. He continued to gaze long and hard at the view. "I was sitting at my desk chair and then I looked over. There was a lamp on in that window, but 1 second later it went dark." "You didn't see it?" "It was literally 1 second. "No, I didn't catch it from the front view. It wouldn't be as obvious from that angle." We stood side by side, quiet. I was glad Van wasn't placating me, telling me maybe I was making things up. I turned to face him. "What do you think is happening inside? Just random break-ins? People sleeping there? Is someone trapping women inside?" "My goodness. You go from someone sleeping in there to someone trapping women inside?" It's okay, my mind does it too. I made the last sound like a joke, but was serious. I was looking for reassurance that there was still order in my world. I don't know, but everything about that house that night is messing with my peace of mind, he trailed off. Hey, do you think they could all be lying to you about that night? I asked. My voice was soft, but I couldn't think of a gentle way to phrase the question. Van didn't continue, and it was obvious he wasn't ready to answer the question. These were his best friends. I didn't press, and we stood quietly, watching from the window. Well, I said finally, expecting Van to make his excuse to leave. Instead, Van sat down on my bed. I noticed the bruising beneath his eyes. Van always had that teenage boy thing going on where he looked like he'd just woken up, but now he looked tired on a whole different level. You said you've had trouble sleeping since that night you blacked out, I asked. Yeah, it happened once before. Insomnia, I mean. I was 5. That was how old he'd been when his dad had died. It was also the same year his mother remarried Kevin, and they'd bought the house across the street. What about you? Van asked. I've seen your light on a lot lately. He's noticing. How long did your insomnia last? When you were 5, I mean. Van's face registered disappointment that I hadn't answered his question, like he'd offered something and I'd rejected it. A while, he said. I didn't like the sound of that, like I might now be on an endless loop. Nervous, I'd gathered my hair in one fist and smoothed it over one shoulder. Why wasn't I telling him? There was no good reason here. He was sharing his problem with me. Maybe I could share mine. Yeah, I'm having trouble sleeping. When did it start? He leaned back on his hands. Since last week, the accident. It's just strange. I'm so tired, but I can't sleep. And then you get kind of manic, and it gets harder and harder. Exactly, I nodded. What are you worried about? He asked. Ha, that was funny. Screaming women fleeing the house next door, my diving career, money, him. I shrugged one shoulder. As soon as school gets out, I have regionals, and then zones, and then junior national championships. Now is the worst possible time to be out for a month. I've got to sleep. The doctors say it's the best way to heal. Van looked like he was thinking hard about something. Finally, he said, Misery loves company. Since neither of us can sleep and your mom's gone, do you want to hang out at night? Maybe we can ride out our insomnia together. What? Van shifted on my bed and broke eye contact. I've learned a lot about the subject lately. His eyes cut back to mine. I also have Ambien. You wouldn't get in trouble? I know how to sneak out. Van consulted his phone. I gotta go. He stood to leave. Just let me know. It was exactly what I shouldn't do, but something inside me seemed to loosen, like a door opened, and I stepped right through. That sounds great. Okay, and now we are on chapter 10 of chapter 10. Okay, chapter 10, Wednesday, April 6th. Are you getting a hotel room for prom? Colette asked Izzy. You mean as a group? Izzy looked unsure. I traced one finger through the yellow pollen on the side of Izzy's burgundy-colored Honda Civic. Half listening to my friend talk about prom in the parking lot after school, Izzy was there, as well as Preeti, Colette, and Molly. I streaked my finger along the car, and a scratch in the paint slipped my finger. I brought it to my mouth and tasted metallic blood while I watched Wilson and Max round the opening of the wilting chain link fence like movie stars presented in slow motion. The low-ceilinged buildings of the school in the frame behind them. Oh my God, speaking of hotel rooms, did you hear that Anna B's mom got caught having an affair? She was in the Hilton parking lot on her lunch break with someone from her law firm, Colette was saying. That is such a rumor, Molly said. My mom told me she said there's no place to go for privacy. Oh. Uh-oh. I don't know where we were. 1 second. Okay, I'm just gonna hope that I didn't miss anything. Okay, where were we? So we just started chapter 10. We just read the first page. My mom told me, she said there's no place to go for privacy. Everyone gets caught eventually. I think she was trying to scare me. While I pretended to listen to the conversation around me, I surreptitiously followed the boys with my eyes. Max wore a crisp black t-shirt and black Ray-Bans. His red hair was getting long and beginning to curl at his collar. Wilson's outfit was more preppy, an untucked button-down and jeans. He was cultivating a rich kid vibe, very skinny, stoned eyes at half-mast all of the time, slouching like he was a puppy with limbs too long for his body. I spied loafers on his feet, the buttery, soft, beaten-up kind. His glossy black hair had also grown long with his curls stretching out. The boys had become self-aware this year. They knew how cool they were. I'd seen them go through a metamorphosis over the past several months, and it was easy to guess the influence. Seba. Seba was stationed by his BMW, holding court, everything staged around him, drawing the beautiful people and closing the circle to everyone else. Sebastian, aka Seba, was skinny with short curly hair, quoted 90s film, and didn't talk to anyone he deemed not worth his time. He'd shown up at the beginning of the school year because word had it his private school had caught him cheating. There were whispers about rehab. I knew him from elementary and middle school, and he'd been exactly the same, except now he owned his short stature. I disliked him ever since second grade when he'd said he hated Jewish people. Seba snickered, probably at someone else's expense. The others laughed, and Wilson, apparently the butt of the joke, pushed Seba's shoulder. The school year, it was like the boys had absorbed some of Seba Wilson's loafers, sunglasses worn in the classroom, and an attitude with a layer of cutting watchfulness. There were rumors of cocaine parties at Seba's parents' lake house. I wondered how much Van was involved in all that. Izzy leaned into me and whispered, "You're staring." I gave my head a little shake. I was spacing out, I guess. I'd forgotten my sunglasses, which I wish I could hide behind now. I was so rarely in the parking lot after school where everyone checked out everyone else. Usually I was long gone. I would have been having private lessons with with Coach Mike by the time the final bell rang. They think they're so cool. They are so cool, I guess, Izzy said wistfully. I watch Max for a moment. She'd had a thing for him since sophomore year when they'd flirted nonstop in chemistry. He'd even come to watch her play the baker's wife. "Here comes Caroline and company," Izzy said. I couldn't resist and aimed my gaze at a group of the opposite side of the parking lot, the seniors. Caroline was walking toward the senior corner with two other girls, one with long, skinny hair named Skylar, and another who wore very short cutoffs. How had Caroline moved to Austin only a couple of years ago and integrated so effortlessly? There we go, close enough. The girls in her grade had made room for her. The alpha males instantly wanted to date her. As Izzy had once said, Caroline had that popular gene. What I couldn't get over was how, even though she wasn't nearly as competitive as the top divers on our team, she still excelled at diving, a pretty cutthroat sport, and she'd only taken it up since quitting gymnastics. While I knew it was useless to compare myself, in my mind, she had it all. She had diving and a boyfriend. The boyfriend. The car singed my thighs were skin-touch paint, but I let it burn. It made me feel present. Since the accident, I trudged through a fog like a dull headache and felt like being under a foot of warm gray water. Seba left his post and jogged to catch up to Caroline and her friends. He tapped Caroline on the shoulder, and when she whipped around to see who it was, he came close into her personal space. Seba didn't even glance at the other girls. I saw him cock his head, grin, and then say something to Caroline. The other two girls laughed in disbelief at the boldness of whatever he just said. Seba then reached out to gently adjust the charm on Caroline's necklace so it fell once again just above her cleavage. Caroline caught his hand and seemed to hold it for an instant, looking into his eyes. Then Caroline took a step back and laughed and rolled her eyes, expertly handling him like she was used to aggressive male attention and didn't want to cause a scene. Seba grinned and put his hands on his hips, watching as the girls walked away from him. He was the asshole, the very charming asshole, who flirted with someone else's girlfriend for everyone to see. I knew Seba and Caroline were friends, but that Seba made no secret he was into her. I'd seen Seba socializing with Caroline even before he was hanging out with Van and the boys. Maybe Seba had made the introduction. He couldn't be happy Caroline and Van were together. Did you see Max and Wilson's tattoos? Preeti asked in her high sing-song voice, as if she'd ever spoken a word to either of them. What did they get? Izzy asked. She didn't look up from her phone. The same one, both of them. Kind of small, tribal sort of. Wilson's looked infected. Ew. Van probably has it on his upper arm now, too, Preeti said. I didn't comment. I was brought back immediately to the touch of Van's bare arm against mine. That was one thing about my new waking state. My mind could wholly disappear from one moment into another. I lifted my sleeveless t-shirt away from my body, trying to unstick it. The sun was unrelenting. The moment just after Preeti said Van's name, he appeared like magic, his long gait head down, maybe to avoid the blinding reflection of the white concrete. He had a quiet confidence and wore his popularity naturally. It was just who he was. He had also been born with that gene. Tagawa, Seba called. Van waved his greeting, but to my surprise, he strode past his friends toward Caroline's group, wordlessly hopping up on the open bed of the silver truck. Caroline immediately leaned against his leg, and he wrapped his arms loosely around her shoulders. She tipped her head backward and he kissed her forehead. Nausea crept up my sternum. In the background, cheers erupted from the baseball field. If I wasn't crazy and hadn't made last night up, I'd see Van tonight. He'd left without a word about where we were going to meet and what time. When we'd sat across the room from each other just 20 minutes ago in class, we'd had zero communication. He's so into her, Colette said. He was all about hookups, but no girlfriends, and now look at him. It was true. I'd never seen Van so attentive. I'd also never seen him dismiss his friends. Ingrid, what? That look on your face, Colette said, sizing me up. I was having problems bringing Colette into focus. She seemed too close to me, and her dainty features hadn't sharpened into view. What do you mean? I asked, from her auburn ringlets to her short stature. Everything about Colette fit the word cute. She was cast as the lead in every school play. With dawning knowledge, a slow smirk spread over Colette's face. Like total longing. I have never seen you look at a boy that way. No, I'm just out of it. In our group, Colette and I were the least close. She and Izzy had gone to school together since kindergarten, and she was possessive of Izzy. Colette was also smart in a way I hated. She had x-ray vision when it came to seeing people's weaknesses. I'd had enough of her laughing when Izzy's Israeli mom would say something not quite right in English. There was zero way Colette could know I had feelings for Van. Colette was the reason I'd never even hinted to Izzy that I had a crush on him. Izzy once told me Colette was intimidated by me because I was pretty and I didn't give a fuck. Izzy's words. I doubted it on both counts, but I wanted to kiss Izzy for saying it. I liked the idea of hiding the real me. There was a lot of respect to be had when you came off as being invulnerable. Hey, by the way, any more break-ins next door? It's so weird because it's a good neighborhood. I thought it was, Colette remarked. The last one was a few weeks ago, I said. How many have there been now? Izzy asked. The police have been called 3 times? No, 4. 3, I think. I just wanted to go. What if someone is using the place for something, not just stealing stuff like they're set up set up shop? Colette said. I watched Caroline hold her rose gold phone up to her ear and wander away from the group to talk without consulting the time. I knew she was late for practice. Van watched her closely all at once. Like a herd of elk, Caroline's group across the parking lot seemed to sense they were being watched and turned their heads in our direction. I jolted away from the car and quickly gave them my back. Anything to look like I wasn't a voyeur? Izzy, you still good with giving me a ride? And that was chapter 10. Next time we will read chapter 11 and 12. I hope you guys enjoyed. And have a great day. And really hope you guys enjoyed.